So today we're going to go over the integumentary system and the skeletal system. So the first one we're going to go over is the integumentary system. So type in the chat what you guys remember from last time. We summarized what the integumentary system was, so just type it in the chat. Yeah, hair, skin, and nails. So that's basically what the integumentary system is, but let's go into it. So we're going to talk about the introduction, of course, the function of the integumentary system, what the epidermis is, the dermis, the hypodermis, glands and accessory organs, diseases and conditions, and medical roots. So this was a summary I told you guys last time. The integumentary system is basically the skin, hair, and nails on our body. It is the largest organ in the body. It encloses and protects the body and is the site of many sensory receptors. The skin is also the body's first defense against pathogens, and it also helps regulate body temperature and eliminates waste and sweat. It is made up of the hair, skin, and nails and exocrine glands. It has accessory structures such as hair, nails, sebaceous glands, and sweat glands. The skin is an exterior covering of the body. It weighs more than 6 pounds in the average adult, covering more than 3,000 inches. It is considered the largest organ of the human body. Do you guys have any questions about this slide? Of the integumentary system include protection against invasions from bacteria, harmful agents, and from injury. It prevents the loss of water in the body. The skin helps us gain vitamin D from the sun and milk products. It helps regulate body temperature, and it excretes wastes through sweat, and it also helps regulate the perception of stimuli. Does anyone have any questions about this slide? Function and physiology. Too much sun exposure can cause cancer and different disorders of the skin. We're going to go over them in the later slides. You need at least 15 minutes of sun. The body is cooled when sweat evaporates off your skin. We also have the perception of sense. In our skin, we have millions of nerve endings and sensory receptors, which trigger the brain, and it triggers the cerebral cortex in the brain. If you guys have any questions, just type it in the chat. So we have 3 layers of the skin. The first is the epidermis, the second is the dermis, and the third is the hypodermis. So we're going to go over the epidermis first. So the epidermis is basically the topmost layer of the skin. It is composed of keratinized, stratified squamous epithelium. It is made up of 4 or 5 layers of epithelial cells. It basically depends on whether it is thick skin or thin skin. It does not have any blood vessels within it, so we call it avascular. From deep to superficial, the layers are the stratum basale, stratum spinosum, stratum granulosum, and stratum corneum. Most of the skin can be classified as thin skin. Thick skin is only found on the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet. It has a 5th layer called the stratum lucidum, located between the stratum corneum and the stratum granulosum. And don't worry about this if you're getting confused right now. We're going to go over the layers later, and you can see exactly where they are. All of the layers of the epidermis have cells called keratinocytes, cells that manufacture and store the protein keratin. Keratin is an intracellular fibrous protein that gives hair, nails, and skin their hardness and water-resistant properties. Do you guys have any questions? Okay. So we call the layers of the epidermis stratas. So the topmost layer is the corneum, and the deepest layer is the layer basale. So for going from the corneum, yeah, I'll show you guys the picture of the epidermis later. So Below the corneum is the stratum lucidum, and below it is granulosum, and below that is spinosum, and then we get to stratum basale. So here's a diagram of the 5 stratas of the skin. Again, I went over stratum lucidum, which is only in thick skin, in like the soles of the feet. The rest of the stratas are in every type of skin, everywhere on our body. Again, stratum lucidum is not present in thin skin. So stratum corneum is the topmost layer of the epidermis. It is the thickest and toughest layer. It is tough and waterproof, and it has dead cells filled with keratin. Keratin is a protein substance. It's basically hard tissue cells. There are usually 15 to 30 layers of cells in the stratum corneum. Cells in this layer are shed periodically and are replaced by cells pushed up from the stratum granulosum, or stratum lucidum in the case of the palms and soles of the feet. So if you guys can see, the dotted area that's marked is the stratum corneum. It is the topmost layer of the skin. It's the layer that we can actually feel and touch. And what it is basically dead cells filled with the protein keratin. Does anyone have any questions about the stratum corneum? Okay. Next, we have the stratum lucidum. It is the thinnest layer and it is transparent. The cells in this layer are dead or dying, and sometimes they are non-existent in thinner skin. This thin layer of cells is found only in the thick skin of the palms, soles, and private parts. The keratinocytes that compose the stratum lucidum are dead and flattened. These cells are densely packed with a clear protein that is rich in lipids derived from another protein, which gives these cells their transparent appearance and provides a barrier to water. Again, this is the only layer of the epidermis that is not present in every type of skin. And the dotted layer area that you see is the stratum lucidum. It's basically flat cells that are not dead yet. Some of them are dead, but some of them are still alive, and they're filled with keratin. And it's a completely transparent layer. Next, we have the stratum granulosum. It is directly below the stratum lucidum, and it has keratin. It is tough, and it is also waterproof. It is granular because it contains histamine. The keratinization is the process of cells dying. The process of the dying cell starts, and the cells become hardened. And they are filled with the fibrous protein called keratin, and this is present in the skin, hair, and the nails. Keratinocytes have cell membranes that thicken, and they generate large amounts of the protein keratin, which is fibrous, and which accumulates as lamellar granules within the cells. These 2 proteins give the layer its grainy appearance. The nuclei and other cell organelles disintegrate as the cells die, leaving behind the keratin. The cell membranes that will form the stratum lucidum, the stratum corneum, and the accessory structures of the hair and nails. So when someone says stratum granulosum, what comes into your mind? Like, what word comes into your mind? Type it in the chat. Yeah, so it's grainy. So the keratin gives it that grainy appearance. Yeah. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about the stratum granulosum? Okay, I think we're good to go. So the dotted area you see is the stratum granulosum, and the red dots that you see are the lamellar granules, which give it its appearance. And it is directly above the stratum spinosum, which we'll go over next. So stratum spinosum. Now, if I say spinosum, what comes into your mind when I say that? What word? Spiny. Yeah. So it is a spiky looking kind of area. It has lines between the cells. So if you go back to the diagram, let me just go to the spinosum. If you look at each of the cells in the area, in the dotted area, they have different lines that connect them. So let's go over them and see what they do. So the cells in stratum spinosum are waterproof. They are spiny in appearance due to the protruding cell processes that join the cells via a structure called a desmosome. The desmosomes interlock with each other and strengthen the bond between the cells. It is composed of 8 to 10 layers of keratinocytes formed as a result of cell division in the stratum basale. It contains Langerhans cells, which engulf bacteria, foreign particles, and damaged cells that occur in this layer. The keratinocytes in the stratum spinosum begin with the synthesis of keratin and release a water-repelling glycolipid that helps prevent water loss from the body, making the skin relatively waterproof. So at this layer, we basically start seeing how the keratin inside the cells is changing as the cells are dying and how it's making the skin waterproof, because that's one of the main functions of skin. Its waterproof nature is what protects the body. It's the body's first defense against pathogens. So stratums are basically another word for layers. It's just a fancier word, I guess. And strata, the word strata means layers. So I guess because the skin already has 3 layers, the hypodermis, the dermis, and the epidermis, they decided to call the layers within the epidermis strata. So next so this is stratum spinosum, like I talked about. And the keratin is basically hardening right now so that in the layers above, the cells become more waterproof. Yeah, kind of like sublayers. So stratum basale, or German ativum, the stratum basale is a single layer of cuboidal-shaped keratinocytes. All of the keratinocytes in the epidermis are produced from this single layer of stem cells, which are constantly going through mitosis to produce new cells. As new cells are formed, the existing cells are pushed superficially away from the stratum basale. So inside this stratum, we have the production of melanin. So I'm pretty sure everyone here knows what melanin is to some degree. So what do you guys think it is? Yeah, it's a skin pigment. So what melanin does, it gives the cells color and protects us from UV radiation. The more melanin we have in our skin, the more darker our skin is, and the more protection we get from the sunlight. So this is the only layer that is capable of cellular division because it has the stem cells within it. The stem cells create the cells that eventually die, and as more cells are created by the stem cells, everything gets pushed up to the top layers. And at the stratum corneum, which was the topmost layer, the cells start to kind of like die off and they shave off our skin. And so this process keeps going on and on. And that's how we make new skin. Yeah, so we grow more skin. So this layer is capable of cellular division, and it contains Merkel cells, which function as receptors and are responsible for stimulating sensory nerves that the brain perceives as touch. In a growing fetus, fingerprints form where the cells of the stratum basale meet the papillae of the underlying dermal layer, the papillary layer, resulting in the formation of the ridges on your fingers that you recognize as fingerprints. So when we talk about the second layer of the skin, the dermis, we're going to talk about one of its layers called the papillary layer. It connects to the epidermis's stratum basale, and the ridges that are formed at that connection are the reason we have fingerprints. Does anyone have any questions about the slide or any of the slides above? Okay, I think we're good. So I had to kind of put 3 boxes here. If you notice 3 areas that are outlined. The pink area that you see in the middle is actually the dermis, and everything around it is the stratum basale. So the first layer that you see are going to be your stem cells, the first layer right next to the dermis. And there's also this gray kind of cell, and if you see it, it's in the first box on the bottom. That is the melanocyte that contains the melanin that gives our skin the color that it has. And then this blue thing right here is the Merkel cell, and the thing beneath it, the yellow thing, is a sensory neuron. Does anyone have any questions about what I just explained? Okay. So next we're going to talk about the dermis. It is the second layer of the skin, right below the epidermis. So the dermis is the second main layer of the skin. It contains connective tissues, contains lymphatics, nerves, nerve endings, vessels, sebaceous and sweat glands, elastic fibers, and hair follicles. The dermis is made up of 2 layers of connective tissue that compose an interconnected mesh of elastic and collagenous fibers produced by fibroblasts. So the dermis has 2 layers, the papillary layer and the reticular layer. Yes, the dermis is thick. It has all of the organs. I think there was a diagram somewhere in the PowerPoint, but I'll point out to you everything that it has. It has a lot of different things. It has all of our blood vessels and all of the sensory receptors. Everything is in the dermis. So the first layer is the papillary layer. So the name papillary is basically finger or footprint-like. So the ridges that we talked about earlier, that the ridges, they help with your making fingerprints. And everyone's ridges are different. That means everyone's ridges, fingerprints are different as well. The papillary layer is made of loose areolar connective tissue, which means that the collagen and elastin fibers of this layer form a loose mesh. It connects to the stratum basale in the epidermis to form finger-like dermal papillae. Yeah, kind of like a serial number on a dollar. Within the papillary layer are fibroblasts, a small number of fat cells, which are called adipocytes, and an abundance of small blood vessels. In addition, the papillary layer contains phagocytes, defensive cells that help fight bacteria and other infections that have breached the skin. This layer also contains lymphatic capillaries, nerve fibers, and touch receptors called the mucinous corpuscles. Next, we have the reticular layer. It is right below the papillary layer, and reticular basically means the white fibrous tissue that supports the blood vessels. It's kind of like a network of fibers. It is thicker than the papillary layer, and it is composed of dense, irregular connective tissues. It has a lot of blood vessels and sensory and sympathetic nerves. Elastin fibers provide some elasticity to the skin, enabling movement. The collagen fibers provide the structure and tensile strength. The collagen fibers also help bind water to keep the skin hydrated. Does anyone have any questions about the papillary layer or the reticular layer? Okay, I think we're good. So next we have the hypodermis. It is also called the subcutaneous layer or the superficial fascia. It is almost 100% made of fat cells. It helps with temperature regulation and insulation. The hypodermis serves to connect the skin to underlying fascia, the fibrous tissue of the bones and muscles. It is not strictly a part of the skin, although the border between the hypodermis and dermis can be difficult to distinguish. So next, let's talk about the glands and accessory organs. So we have 4 main glands in the integumentary system: sudoriferous, sebaceous, ceruminous, and mammary glands. So sudoriferous are our sweat glands. They get rid of waste through pores, which cools you off. When your sweat evaporates off your skin, that's what gives us the cooling feeling. And sebaceous glands secrete sebum, which is a natural oil that our body makes to lubricate our hair and skin. The amount of sebum that we create increases with age, puberty, and pregnancy. The ceruminous gland produces earwax in the ear canal, which leads from the outer ear to the eardrum. And the mammary glands are a network of sacs that produce milk during lactation. Does anyone have any questions? I'm not sure if you can burn fat off of your hypodermis. That sounds kind of scary, but the hypodermis is made up of mostly fat. Mammary is also in males, but women use it for when they have given birth to feed the baby. Now let's talk about accessory organs. Oh, the hypodermis is basically just fat. Some people don't even like call it a layer of the skin because I don't know how to explain it, but there's no sublevels in the hypodermis. It's fat.
Right?
Huh? Okay, so in the accessory organs for the body, we have 4 main accessory organs. There are so many more that we have in the dermis layer of the skin, but these are the 4 that I'm going to go over. Lanugo, hair, the erector pili muscle, and nails. So what lanugo is, it's the hair found on the fetus, an unborn child, and it aids with building hair and skin in the future when the baby is born. Hair, everyone knows what hair is. It is the keratinized structure which grows within the skin. The erector pili muscle is attached to each piece of hair, and it's involved with irritants and emotional feelings and temperatures, and it is found in the root of the hair follicle. So when you guys get goosebumps, what happens is that you get that like cold feeling and then your hair starts to raise. That's the erector pili muscle basically working to raise the piece of hair. It's kind of like a stimulus against extreme cold or fright. It's a response of the body. And nails are hardened keratin, hardened tissue. So everything in the integumentary system, if you've noticed, kind of works around keratin, which is a protein. Now let's go over hair. So the hair has 3 layers. It has the medulla, which is the innermost layer. It might even be absent, especially in fine or light blonde hair. We have the cortex after that, which provides the hair strength, moisture, color, and texture. The cuticle comes after the cortex. It is the outermost layer of the hair, and it protects the cortex like a hard shingle-like layer overlapping the cells, kind of like scales. So hair papillary, which is also a part of the hair system, it is in our basically inside our skin, not on the actual hair shaft. It provides nourishment and hair growth, and it is at the base of the hair. We have the hair cuticle, which I talked about earlier, covers the hair shaft, protecting from chemicals and from losing moisture. And then the hair cortex contains melanin and most of the hair's weight. And when damaged, it dries the hair out. So if you have damaged hair, that means there's something wrong in your hair cortex. Next, we have the accessory organs. The second accessory organ that we talked about, nails. So nails have a lot of parts. I chose the 5 most important ones that I felt were important enough to talk about. We have the root of the nail, or the germinal matrix. It is beneath the skin, behind the fingernail. We have the lunula, the area where the nail grows. It's the white crescent shape that you see on your nail. We have the nail bed, which contains the blood vessels, nerves, and melanocytes, or melanin-producing cells, like we talked about earlier. We have the nail plate, which is the actual fingernail, and it is made of translucent keratin. And we have the cuticle, which is situated between the skin of the finger and the nail plate, fusing these structures together and providing a waterproof barrier. So yeah, who knew our nails could be so complex? Does anyone have any questions about nails, hair, the accessory organs, glands, or anything like that?
Excuse me?
Just type your questions in the chat. Okay, so next we're going to talk about the diseases and the conditions of the integumentary system. Oh, someone needs me to go back to the hair slide. Okay, so let me know when you're finished. Again, we have a lot to talk about. We still have another whole system to go over. You can definitely find all of these slides in the YouTube recording that we'll post later. For now, I'm going to move on. So, diseases and conditions of the skin. So, we have a lot, of course. These are the 4 that I chose. 8 actually that I chose. So acne. Acne is probably the most common condition of the skin. It is an infection in the pores of the skin. Next, we have albinism, and it's when someone produces little to no melanin, which is in the skin and the hair. And cicatrix, which is a scar after a wound. Cyanosis is a bluish discoloration of skin from poor circulation or oxygenation. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. We have ecchymosis, which is the discoloration in the skin from bleeding underneath, especially from bruising. We have gangrene, which is dead tissue caused by infection or lack of blood flow. We have keloids, which is basically excess protein or collagen in the skin during healing. It's not dangerous. And impetigo, which mainly occurs in infants and children. It is basically a red sore near the mouth or the nose. Albinism is a genetic disease that is in most organisms. It is in humans. It's not that common, but it does occur in humans. Next, we're going to go over some medical roots. There are so many medical roots for every system, but here are the 14 that I chose to talk about, and here they are. So, carcino would mean cancer. Cutino, I shouldn't say it with the O, that's just the combining vowel. So, cutin means the skin. Cyan means blue, so like cyanosis we talked about earlier. Dermato means the skin. Dermo also means the skin. Erythro means a red kind of color. Kerat, like in keratin, it's like a horn-like structure. We have lipo, which is fat. Melano, which is black or melanin, like melanocyte or melanin. We have onyc, which is nail. Sebo, which is sebum and oil, are the natural oil that our body produces. We have pseudo, which is sweat, such as pseudoriferous glands. We have tricho, which is hair, and ungo, which is nails. So there's actually a medical term that when I was learning the integumentary system, I found pretty funny. It's basically, it was some kind of word with the root for hair, tricho. It's basically like a condition where you eat hair. I didn't know that was possible, but it is. Again, medical terminology is so interesting. Anyone who's taken it should know. It's awesome. So, does anyone have any questions? Diseases? Yeah, I can go back to the diseases. Do you have one in particular that you need me to go over? Okay, go on to the next slide. So like I said, in the first session, what is the job of blood? What does blood do for the body? Does anyone want to tell us in the chat? What is the role of blood in the body? Yeah, blood moves oxygen around. Blood moves nutrients around as well. So if blood isn't going into your fingers, that means oxygen isn't going into your fingers, and the cells in your fingers are going to eventually die off because they aren't receiving any nutrients or oxygen from the body. Yeah, I can go over to the roots. Can your skin recover from gangrene? I am not sure. I was trying to find some pictures that weren't as scary because some of the diseases and conditions of the body can be kind of scary, but I'm pretty sure you can't recover from gangrene because once the skin's dead, it is dead. It would probably result in them having to cut it off. And these are the roots again. So tell me, what is your favorite part of the integumentary system? So what did you guys like learning about? Was it the epidermis, the dermis, the hypodermis, hair, nail? People are saying hair, nail, epidermis. The epidermis has so many layers. I know it has a lot going on. Yeah, the stratas. Yeah, it's a lot to remember, and don't worry, you don't have to remember this. This again is an introduction. It is way too much to learn in one sitting in 5 minutes. But now you know that the skin has 3 layers, and the topmost layer of the skin has 5 layers. The hypodermis was kind of hard to understand. Yeah, so the hypodermis is just fat. It's pure fat underneath the actual layers of the skin. Mm-hmm. The nails are pretty cool too. Okay, so I think we can get started on the skeletal system. I just want to ask one more time because I know I go really fast. Does anyone have any questions? Besides the actual fat in the hypodermis, it has blood vessels, of course, because they're still cells, adipocytes, and they still need oxygen. Uh, I was exaggerating. It's not 100%, but it's most of it. The intro page, yeah, I can go back to it. I know it's a lot to take in, but you guys got this. And if you guys have any questions later, just email us or write it down and I'll answer them at the next class. No, the nail is not made up of bone matter. The nail is made up of keratin. If it was made up of bone matter, it would be part of the skeletal system, but it's made up of keratin, which is a protein, so it belongs in the integumentary system. If you want to be in the medical field, I am sure you would have to know the layers of the skin. And in the classes, you would be tested over this, but it's not like you're going to have to remember it. You'll keep learning it again and again in your medical classes. Your body cannot, as far as I know, reproduce destroyed nerves. Your earlobes are just like regular skin. It has the 3 layers. So skin is made up of keratin. So yes, your earlobes will be made up of keratin. Okay. So are we good? Does anyone have any more questions? Okay, great. Who liked the integumentary system? Rate it on a scale of 1 through 10. And in the meantime, I'm going to put up the second PowerPoint. Oh, someone said a 1? I bet that made the integumentary system pretty sad. The integumentary system is not bad. It's pretty easy once you get past the memorizing. Yeah, we all love the integumentary system. I think we'd look pretty scary without our skin. Okay. All right, I'm going to share the second PowerPoint. The skeletal system. Who thinks that the skeletal system is the coolest thing in the world so far? Like, from the first slide. All right, cool. Let's go over it now. So, we are going to talk about, of course, the introduction, our summary, the function of the skeletal system, bone shape and composition, types, the axial skeleton, the appendicular skeleton, diseases and conditions, and then the medical roots. Dia, I hope I can change your mind that the skeletal system is better than the integumentary system. Or sorry, that the integumentary system is better. Because the skeletal system is also very cool. Yes, the skeletal system is 100% your bones. Okay, introduction. The skeletal system consists of bones, joints, and teeth. The bones of the skeletal system are connected by tendons, ligaments, and cartilage. The functions of the skeletal system include supporting the body and giving it shape. Along with the muscular system, the skeletal system enables the body to move. The body of the skeletal system also is to protect internal organs, store calcium, and produce red and white blood cells. Yeah, we all learned about the bones, but now we're going to go deeper into this topic. Bones may look like, they're just there, but they're very, very confusing sometimes. So, the skeleton is basically divided up into two categories, the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. So the axial skeleton is made up of 80 bones. It is the part of the skeleton that consists of bones in the head and the trunk of the vertebrae. In the human skeleton, it consists of 80 bones and is composed of 6 parts: the skull, which is 22 bones, the ossicles of the middle ear, the hyoid bone, the rib cage, the sternum, and the vertebral column. So as you guys can see here, we have basically the middle part of our body basically makes up the the axial skeleton. So we've got the skull, the facial bones, your rib cage, your sternum, your spine, and then some of your hip bones, your tailbone, sorry. And then we're going to talk about the appendicular skeleton, which is basically mostly your limbs. So we've got the arms, the legs, the hands, the pelvic girdle, the shoulder girdle, the foot. So it's made up of 126 bones. It is the portion of the skeleton that consists of vertebrae and the bones that support the appendages, which is your arms and legs. The appendicular skeleton includes the skeletal elements within the limbs, as well as supporting the shoulder girdle, pectoral, and pelvic girdle. So does anyone have any questions about the axial and appendicular skeleton? Sorry. We've got 2 parts. One has 80 and it's kind of like in the middle of the body, and then we have 126. Do skeletons have membranes, or I'm getting yeah, bones do have different layers as well, and we'll go over them. It's just that there are so many types of bones, but there's 5 main types, and we'll go over them. So, newborn babies, they have a whole different skeletal system. I mean, not a whole different, but they have more bones than humans. How many bones do adult humans have? Yeah, it's on the side. I know that some of you guys were cheating. 100%. Okay. Yes, the human body, adult body, has 206 separate bones. And I'm I shouldn't say adult because around the age of 4 or 5, we begin to have we start having the bones that we live with for the rest of our life. But newborn babies have 300 separate bones that eventually fuse together. And by the age of 4 or 5, we end up with our final skeleton of 206 separate bones. Function. What is the function of the skeletal system? It includes the support and shape, the body's framework, the protection of internal organs, movement. Muscles pull the bones. They're attached together, so they're responsible for movement in the body. Storage for minerals to help bones strengthen and grow, and blood cell formation, the red bone marrow in the medullary cavity. So we're going to talk about all this. And it might be different from bone shape to bone shape, but we'll go over it. So let's talk about bone shape now. Okay. I didn't take off those pictures from last time. Ignore that. Those are the positions. Okay, so we've got long bones, short bones, flat bones, irregular bones, and sesamoid bones. So long bones include the humerus and the radius. So when we go back to our skeletons, the humerus is basically the arm bone, and it's a long bone. So when you say long, it's actually just long. It's pretty simple. And the bones of the hand are considered short bones. We have flat bones, which is the sternum. We have irregular bones, such as the vertebrae. They don't really have a set shape. And then we have sesamoid bones, like the patella. Does anyone know what the strongest bone in the body is? Yes, it is the femur. The femur is the strongest bone in the body. And what kind of bone do you think that is? What kind of bone shape does it have? Actually, Abhinav, you're right. Thigh bone also works for that question because the thigh bone is the femur. And yes, it is a long bone. So, what is the structure of a long bone? It basically has two parts, but one of those parts repeats at each end. And the yellow stuff you're seeing in the middle, that's the blood marrow. Bone marrow, sorry. Yellow bone marrow. And we're going to go over that later. So the bone has different parts. It's covered in cartilage. And inside, we either have dense or spongy bone. And then we have the medullary cavity, which holds the bone marrow. And around the bone, we have the blood vessels. So bone composition. Like I was saying, we have compact bone and we have like spongy bone. So cortical bone is our strong, dense, hard bone. It's called compact bone as well. It lies under the periosteum. It contains the medullary cavity, which houses yellow bone marrow. And we have cancellous bone, which we also called spongy bone or the trabecular bone. It is porous and less dense. It is mainly found in the epiphysis. I'm not sure if that's how you say it. I'm just going to go along with it, of long bones. It contains red bone marrow where hematopoiesis, the production of red blood cells, happens. Does anyone have any questions? Sure. Which slide do you want me to go back to? Bone shapes. Ignore the pictures. Those are not bone shapes. I will go over this slide next class once I correct this. Okay, great. Okay, so now we're going to go over types of bones. Bone marrow. So we have two kinds of bone marrow. We have red bone marrow and we have yellow bone marrow. So there's a process in how red bone marrow turns into yellow bone marrow. What red bone marrow is, it forms most of the blood cells in the body and helps destroy old blood cells. Yellow bone marrow resides in the central cavities of long bones. It is mostly made up of fat. So in this diagram, you see that there is a child, an infant less than 1 year old, and there is an adult who is over 25 years old. So in the infant, all of its bones have red bone marrow in it. It has no yellow bone marrow. Whereas the adult has yellow bone marrow in its appendages, like the arms and the legs, but it has red bone marrow in the axial skeleton. Remember when we went over that? It's basically your skull, your ribs, your vertebral column, your spinal column. So what happens is that when you're an infant, you have only red bone marrow. And when you're developing as a child, the red bone marrow starts to convert into yellow bone marrow, and it starts in the middle of the bone and it extends to the ends. Yeah, kind of like a filler. Yeah, that's a good way to say it. And by the time you're 20 years old, when you're an adult, you have 100% yellow bone marrow inside your the bones of your appendages, your arms and your legs. And what yellow bone marrow does is that it's fat, but when your body is running out of red blood cells, it starts to convert the yellow bone marrow to red bone marrow so that hematopoiesis can begin and that we can start to produce more blood in the body. Joints. So there are a lot of joints. We have four main types: diarthroses, amphiarthroses, synarthroses, and synovial joints. So diarthroses is basically a joint type which is freely movable. So in the picture I have right below where it says diarthroses, we see the head of the femur connecting to the hip bone. So if the head of the femur couldn't move inside the where it connects to the hip bone, would we be able to move our legs if it wasn't freely movable? No, we wouldn't. So this joint has to be freely movable. And where else in the body do you think we need a freely movable joint? Think about another appendage, another limb. Yeah, where your shoulder is. So that needs to be freely movable as well, where your humerus is. So we have another type of joint, amphiarthroses, and it is slightly movable. So does anyone know in this diagram what bone they're showing? Yeah, your vertebral column, the bones in your spine, your vertebra. So of course your spine can't move freely, but it does move a little bit so that you can move your back. So that's slightly movable. It's not movable all the way, but it does move. Synarthroses is completely immovable. Excuse me. So what do you guys think would happen if, let's say, the skull in the diagram had a diarthroses joint? What would happen? Would our skull just fall apart or would it stay together? Because we have different bones connecting the skull together. It would fall apart. So that's why we need a synarthroses joint, because it's immovable. The bones in our skull do not move. That would be very bad. And then we have synovial joints, which are very, very similar to diarthroses joints. It's basically when a joint where it's between the bones, which move against each other, such as the joints of the limbs, like we talked about diarthroses in the femur and the humerus. Yeah, it would definitely be bad news for the brain if this bones in our skull were synarthroses joints. Okay, so synovial joints. So they're filled with synovial fluid, which helps the bones move against each other. So Would we need this in our skull at all? Would we need a synovial joint in our skull? No. Yes. I love the enthusiasm. No, you do not need synovial fluid in your cranial cavity. No, but you do need it where your arms are, because we need to move our arms. Okay, does anyone have any questions about any of these joints? Yes. Does someone have a question? So, your neck is made up of two bones that belong to your vertebral column that we're going to go over. They're called the axis and the atlas. We're going to go over this. So, keep that question in mind and just think about it when we go over that topic. So, next we have bone processes. Joints of the knee are synovial, yes. We have the trochanter, tubercles, tuberosity, and condyle. So the trochanter processes, it's basically, when we say processes, it's like we have a bone, but bones don't just have one shape. They have bumps here and there. Sometimes they actually have holes in them. So that's what we call processes. And we also have depressions, which are the holes. So we're going to go over that too. But what helps with the shape on our bones are the processes. So we have 4 different kinds that I'm going to talk about. So the trochanter, it basically pokes out. So you can see here in this diagram that green part and the blue part, those are the trochanters, and they're basically poking out of the bone. It helps with the shape. It helps you identify which bone it is. Like, do you guys understand what I mean by the processes of the bones? Looks like a mushroom. No, that part is not a trochanter. That is just part of the bone. The trochanter is actually next to it, the green part. Processes are like the bumps on top of the bones. So the bones aren't smooth. They have like bumps on them, maybe ridges. So that's what we call the processes. Next, we have the tubercles. So if you guys can see where the diagram is pointing towards, it's pointing towards like a bump in the bone. So this is a small rounded point, unlike a tuberosity, which is a bigger rounded point. So if you look where I highlighted it, the deltoid tuberosity, it has this large bump in the humerus, in the anterior part of the humerus. Do you guys see what I'm talking about? Okay. So you guys understand what that is. Tubercles, smaller rounded point. Tuberosity is a bigger rounded point. Then we have the condyle. It's like it's like a bump where one bone connects to another. So in this bone, for example, do you see the 2 condyles? They're like large bumps right on top of the second bone. I don't know if you guys can notice that. Number 2 and number 3, those are the condyles on that bone. It's like a bump where one bone connects to another. Now we're going to talk about bone depressions. So it's basically the opposite of a processes. It's a hole in the bone, or an area where it's like chiseled. So you can notice it. So like sinuses, like have you ever heard when someone has allergies, like maybe their sinuses are blocked? So that's the area where air flows through, like next to your nose, and it can get blocked up sometimes by like mucus and stuff. So our sinuses are open holes or pockets in bones, and we have foramens next. They're basically little holes, like a notch or an indentation. Like when you poke an eraser, the hole you get, it's kind of like an indentation. The same thing with the foramen. It's like a hole in the bone. And then we have fissures. It's basically on top. Do you guys see that little crack in the orbital area where your eye is supposed to be? That's a fissure. That's what we call a fissure. So next we have a sulcus. I know this one is super hard to see, but I tried to highlight it. It's the intertubercular sulcus. Sometimes it's really hard to say in medical terms. I'll try my best. It's basically like the ridge in the bone. I don't know if you guys can see it. It's fine. All of this stuff isn't absolutely important. No one's going to ask you where the sulcus in this random bone is, but it helps you know like what bone is what. And then we have a fossa, which is kind of bullish. So if you look closely at the diagram, the areas which are highlighted they aren't like filled. They're like empty bowls. So this particular diagram is of our cranium. So the top of our head. So do you guys notice where it's kind of like a bullish shape inside of the bone? Okay. Okay, so next we're going to talk about the axial skeleton. So tell me, do you guys remember what the axial skeleton was about? What kind of places did it include? What kind of bones did it include? Does anyone remember? Yeah, skull, rib cage. No. So limbs belong to the appendages, appendicular. So that is like your arms and your legs. So the axial skeleton is, let me show you guys again. Oh wait, I think I went too far. No. So this is the axial skeleton. So it has the skull, our vertebral column, our rib cage, our sternum, and our tailbone. So let's talk more about this. I think I went too far. So we have the skull. We're going to talk about that first. The skull is made up of the cranium and facial bones. There are 22 total bones in the skull, and we're going to go over them, some of them. So we have our cranial vault where our brain is held. We have 4 main bones that hold it together. We have the frontal bone, which makes up your forehead. We have the parietal bones, which make up the sides near our ears. There are 2 of them, and they connect together. Is it a problem if a person has more than 300 bones? So 300 was the number for babies when they're born until they're about 4 or 5. That's when they have about 300 bones. At the age of 4 or 5, some of the bones have fused together, and we end up with 206 bones. So yes, it would be a problem if someone had more than 206 bones. It looks like the skull is 1 bone, but it's actually not. If you look closely, do you see the little lines? Like it looks like cracks between like the frontal and parietal bones. So that's what we call sutures. So we have the coronal suture, which is between the frontal bone and the 2 parietal bones. So between the yellow and the orange areas, that's where the coronal suture is. It connects the 2 bones together. And then we have the sagittal suture. It is placed in the median between the 2 parietal bones, so between the sides of your heads. So let's go over the bones in the cranial vault. So I said the frontal bone makes up your forehead. The parietal bone makes up the bones near your ears. There are 2 of them because you have 2 ears. The temporal bone, which is connected to the jawbone, the mandible. So that purple area you see, that's connected to the mandible. And then we have the occipital, the back or the lower part of the skull. And we went over the directions of the body, so posterior and inferior. So tell me in the chat, what does posterior mean? Back, yes. And then what does inferior mean? Yes, No, no, no. It doesn't mean front. It means lower. So the posterior and inferior part of the skull, or the back and lower part of the skull. So that's what the occipital bone is. That's where it is. So the green part that you see of the skull, that's the occipital bone. And someone asked what sutures were. The sutures are the site of growth, sites of growth in the skull. And the brain also has sutures. So we have the frontal part of our brain, we have parietal parts of our brain, the occipital part of our brain, and the temporal part of our brain, just like our skull bones. So connecting all of those parts of the brain are sutures. So we're going to go over that when we go over the nervous system. This will come back again. Okay, we have 14 facial bones. I'm not going to go over all of them because it's just so complex. It's hard to explain where everything is as well. But we will go over some very important bones of our face. We have the mandible, which is the jawbone. Its job is to regulate chewing. It is the strongest and largest bone in the face, the mandible. So the purple part that you see in the diagram is the mandible. It's right below our jawbone. Quizzes today, I am not planning on doing a quizzes because we have about 90 slides to go through. I mean, we've done most of them now, but I don't think we'll have time for a quizzes. And we have the zygomatic process, which basically makes up our cheeks. So the green areas that you see are zygomatic processes, are zygomatic bones. The nose is made up of two bones, which make up the bridge of the nose, the inferior nasal conchae, and the vomer, which connects the cartilage, which connects with cartilage and nasal bones. The vomer is basically your septum. It's the area between your two nostrils. We have the maxilla, which is the upper jawbone. So the yellow area that you see in the diagram, we have two maxillas. Those make up our upper jawbone. We have the lacrimal bone, which is the smallest bone in the face. It is probably the most important. Yeah, it looks like we have no nose without the skin that covers the skeleton. The reason that is because our noses are given shape with the bridge of our nose and the cartilage that goes around it. Cartilage is not bone. So when you touch your nose, you're not feeling any bone unless you touch the bridge of your nose. All you're feeling is cartilage. So what gives it shape is the cartilage. And without it, you'd look like Voldemort. So, lacrimal bone, I consider it the most important bone in the face because you can't cry without it. It is the smallest bone in the face. It is between the eyes and the nose. So, let me see. The lacrimal bones are basically those small little blue bones near where your eyes are supposed to be. I don't know if you guys can see them. It's like a teal kind of color. And they are responsible for tear formation. And we have the palatine bones, which are at the roof of the mouth. Does anyone know what cleft is? Has anyone ever seen maybe a baby with cleft syndrome? So it's a defect that babies get in the womb. Their palatine bones, there's two palatine bones, they aren't connected. So there's basically a hole where they're supposed to be connected. And sometimes you'll see the little area where their upper lip is ripped because the palatine bones are not connected together. So it can be fixed with surgery, but that is a actual defect that babies can get if palatine bones are not connected together at the roof of the mouth. Next, we have the vertebral column. It's the second part of the axial skeleton. What is the vertebral column? What else do we call it? Yes, we call it the spine. And it is made up of 33 bones. Yeah, backbone, spine. So this can get pretty confusing when you go to name them, so I'm not going to worry about that. Just know where things are. There are 5 main parts of our vertebral column. The first is the cervical, and right underneath it, we have the thoracic vertebrae, the lumbar vertebrae, the sacrum, and the coccyx. The cervical vertebrae has 7 vertebrae within it. So we have the two main vertebrae. So someone asked a question about how the neck moves, how the joints in the neck work. So we have the axis and the atlas vertebrae. They are the first two vertebrae, and they are in the cervical section. So C1, the first vertebrae, is called atlas, and it is directly underneath the cranium. It holds your head up. And then underneath it, we have the axis, C2, the second vertebrae, which allows for the rotation of the atlas vertebrae. So it allows for your face to move. It allows for your neck to move. Does anyone know what atlas and axis reminds them of? Has anyone ever read like Percy Jackson or anything? Atlas holds the world up. Or geography. Yeah, so the atlas doesn't the axis does hold the world up per se. So just keep that in mind when you want to remember them. They're the two most important parts of your vertebral column. Next, we have the thoracic vertebrae, and there's 12 vertebrae in this section. They cover the chest area. We have T1 to T12. We have the lumbar vertebrae, which is the next section. It is in yellow. It forms the lower back, and there are 5 bones, which cover L1 through L5. We have the sacrum, which is 5 bones fused together. We have the coccyx, which is the tailbone, which is 3 to 5 bones. With, some are fused together and some aren't. Okay, is everyone good with this slide? I know it's a lot to take in. Okay. Cool. Next, we're going to go over the thoracic cage. So, Percy Jackson was awesome. I read it in like elementary school. That was a long time ago. 24 ribs make up the thoracic cage. The thoracic cage is awesome. So we have the sternum and the ribs, which make up the thoracic cage. The sternum is a long, flat bone located in the central part of the chest. Excuse me. Sorry. It is a long, flat bone located in the central part of the chest. It connects to the ribs via cartilage and forms the front of the rib cage, protecting the heart, lungs, and major blood vessels from injury. To me, the sternum is such an important bone. It protects so much and holds so much together. I don't know what we'd do without it. Okay, now the ribs. Ribs are interesting. We have 12 pairs of ribs. So how many would that be in total? How many ribs do we have in total? 24. We've got 24 ribs in total. They facilitate breathing and protect the heart and the lungs. They are divided up into 3 categories. We have true ribs, which make up 7 of the 24. We have false ribs. Sorry, not 24 of each pair. So how many true ribs would we have in total out of 24? We would have 14. Yeah. So we have 14 true ribs, which are directly attached to the sternum. So everything you see here attached to the sternum, those are the true ribs, and they're connected by cartilage. But we have 3 false ribs, and basically in total on both sides, that makes up 6 ribs. I'll tell you guys why. So the reason true ribs are called true ribs is because they're directly attached to the sternum, but the false ribs, they connect to the true ribs through cartilage, and then they connect to the sternum. So if you look at, I don't know how to explain it. If you look at the diagram, you can see that there are some, like the lower part of our rib cage, there are some bones that aren't directly attached to the bone in the middle. So those are the false ribs. They connect through the cartilage to the true ribs to the sternum. Can you guys see it? Can you guys see what I'm talking about? Okay. And then we have two floating ribs. They're kind of hard to see at the bottom, but they aren't connected to the sternum at all. They're just on the vertebral column. Do you guys see where they are? Floating ribs 11 and 12. So they are attached to the vertebral column through cartilage and tissue. Okay. Now we're going to talk about the appendicular skeleton. So who remembers what the appendicular skeleton is? Okay, why are they called floating? They're called floating because they aren't attached to the sternum. So if you look at the two bottom, if you go all the way to the bottom, do you see those two long bones that aren't really connected to anything? They're not connected by cartilage to the sternum. They're just floating there off of our vertebral column. So those are our floating ribs. That's why we call them floating, because they aren't connected to anything except the spine. I hope that covered it. So yes, some of you guys responded. So the appendicular skeleton is made up of our limbs, our hands, our arms, our legs, our feet. Let's go over them. So we have the shoulder girdle first. It's made up of 4 bones in total. We have the clavicle and the scapula. Two on each side, 1 on each side, so it would be 4 in total. The scapula is kind of like the triangle shape, and the clavicle is that thin little bone. Do you guys see it? You can actually feel your clavicle. You know that little bone that kind of pops out like at the bottom of your neck? That's your clavicle. The scapula is a flat bone. Yes. So now we're going to talk about the upper extremity. So upper extremity means the arms. It is made up of 30 bones. Okay, sorry. Oops. Okay, so we have the humerus, the ulna, the radius, 30 on each side. No. Well, hold on. Yeah, 30 on each side, sorry. So it would be 60 in total. So basically, the humerus is our upper arm. It connects to the clavicle and the scapula, and that's what forms our upper arm. Then we have our elbow area, which is part of our humerus, and we have the ulna and the radius side by side. So the clavicle is like the shoulder, kind of, and the other is on the back shoulder. Wait, can you repeat that again? I kind of didn't understand what that meant. Whoever asked the last question. So I'm going to continue explaining what the ulna and radius are. So do you guys see the yellow and green bones side by side in the diagram? Yeah, so those are the radius and the ulna. So how we differentiate between where the radius is and where the ulna is if you go to your hand and see which side your thumb is on, right next to it would be your radius, and on the other side would be your ulna. So the ulna is the bone on your pinky side, and the radius is the bone on your thumb side. And then we have the hand. It gets complicated here. We have 8. So basically, there's like 3 kind of layers. I don't know how I'd say that. And then the topmost layer has different sublayers. So the 3 main layers are the carpals, the metacarpals, and the phalanges. 3 parts, yes. So the first part is the carpals, and yes, you can try to memorize each of the carpals and where they are, or you could just know them. So we have the scaphoid, the lunate, the triquetrium, the pisiform, the hamate, capitate, trapezoid, and trapezium. So those make up our 8 carpals, our wrist bones. They make up our wrist. Then we have 5 metacarpals. So the carpals were the really deep purple, and the metacarpals are the blue areas. Yeah, it's a lot. Don't worry about it. Just know that you don't need to memorize anything from this class. This is an introduction because most of you have not ever learned anything that goes this deep. So don't worry about it. You don't need to memorize these. Just know that they're there. So now you know that you have carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges. Phalanges is where things get interesting. We have 14 of them on each hand. So bones of the hands, there's 27 in total from the carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges. So basically, you don't need to memorize where things are. We have 5 metacarpals, and in the phalanges, we have 3 parts. We have the proximal, which is the closest to our wrist, and above it, we have the middle, and above that, we have the distal. That we have in our forefingers. We have 3 parts in our forefingers, but in our thumb, the only things we have are the distal and the proximal. We don't have we don't have a middle bone in our thumb. Yeah, again, don't worry about memorizing this stuff. I had to memorize this stuff being part of the class, and it was difficult, but you start getting the hang of things once you kind of look at the diagrams, notice where things are. So does anyone have any questions about bones of the hands? No? Okay, good. No one asked questions. Just know we have these bones and where they are. Okay, lower extremity, our legs. We have 50 bones in our legs, including the bones in our feet. Yeah, reviewing is great. That's how you get to memorizing this stuff, and you'll get it. You'll get it. So in our leg part, we have 4 main bones. We have the femur, which makes up our upper leg. We have the patella, which is our kneecap. We have the tibia, which is the thick lower leg, and the fibula, which is the skinny lower leg. So when you go to this diagram, the skinny bone that you see near where your shins are, that is the fibula, and the tibia is the fatter bone, kind of in the middle of the body. Again, no need to memorize. Just know that they're there. Does anyone remember anything interesting about the femur that we talked about earlier? Yes, it is the strongest bone in the body, our thigh bones. Okay, so let's talk about the bones of the foot. 26 bones. It's kind of like the same thing going on. Like, if you look at this, I hated the bones of the foot more than I hated the bones of the hand. Don't worry about this. Just know that it's this complicated. So we have 7 tarsals. Okay, I would say if you wanted to memorize something, memorize that we have 7 tarsals, like the bones that are near our heel. We have 5 metatarsals, basically like the flat part of our foot. And then we have 14 phalanges, which is our toes. Just know that if you want to know anything again. 7 tarsals, 5 metatarsals, and 14 phalanges. So the 7 tarsals are our ankle bones. We have the calcaneus, our heel bone. The talus is the bone that connects our foot to our leg. Then we have the navicular, the cuboid, and the cuneiforms. Again, don't worry about this. We have 5 metatarsals. They make up our foot. We have 14 phalanges. They make up our toes. It's kind of the same thing. The tips of our feet are called the distal phalanges. The middle are called the intermediate, and it is not present in the big toe. And the third one, which is closest to our heel, is called a proximal. Lots of phalanges, yes. We have 14 phalanges in our foot. We have 14 phalanges in our hands. The thumb only has 2 phalanges. Okay, I'm going to move on now because I know you guys are going to try to memorize this and don't. Yes, basically the only thing that's really different is the fact that the 7 tarsals are different from the 8 carpals. We had 8 wrist bones, and the ankle bones, we have 7 of them. Again, you don't need to memorize anything. Okay, Then we have the pelvic girdle. We have 6 bones in our pelvis. We have the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. There's 2 of each. So on each side, we have each of these bones. So in total, we have 6 bones. In the topmost, I put the tailbones. So the sacrum and the coccyx that we talked about before that are included in our vertebral column. And then on the diagram on the bottom, we have where the ilium, the pubic bone, and the ischium are. So just kind of get a feel for where things are. No need to memorize, just know they're there. Does anyone have any questions about anything, about the hands, the feet, the legs, the arms, pelvic girdle? I'm guessing no. If anyone's typing right now, go ahead. I'm going to move on to diseases and conditions. So, yeah, we're only going to go over 4 diseases and conditions for the skeletal system. Okay. All right. So we have osteoporosis, leukemia, osteopenia, and scoliosis, kyphosis, and lordosis. They're just different versions of kind of the same idea. For osteoporosis, it's basically where the bone tissue is being broken down and it's causing the bones to become fragile, kind of like soft and spongy. Healthy bone is supposed to be hard and dense and strong. When you have osteoporosis, it's kind of fragile and weak, and the bones break easy. So if you look at it, you can definitely tell the difference between a healthy bone and a bone with osteoporosis. Next, we have leukemia. It is a cancer of white blood cells. So if you guys see what the normal blood looks like, it's different from when you have leukemia. In leukemia, you have more white blood cells in your body, and this leads to like more infections. Yeah, so I'm not sure about that, but that's someone said leukemia is the most common childhood cancer. It is a cancer of the bone. Next, we're going to talk about osteopenia. In osteomalacia, basically, these are just different degrees of bone breakage. They're similar to osteoporosis. It's basically bone loss. And then we have scoliosis, kyphosis, and lordosis. It's basically diseases of the spine. They're abnormalities of the spinal curve. So here, I don't know if you can look closely or not, see them closely, but it's showing you what the normal spine looks like, and whereas these diseases, what they make the spine look like. So for scoliosis, it's kind of like it's swaying. It's kind of curved. In lordosis, it's curved from, I don't know how to explain it, but if you look at the diagram, you can see how they're curved. So the pictures for scoliosis, like the actual pictures of people who had them, kind of look scary, so I just decided to put this. Again, some of the diseases and conditions can get, yes, all of these are very painful because back pain, your spine is not how it's supposed to be. It's not holding your body up. The spine holds your entire body up. If it's not positioned the right way, it can definitely mess some stuff up. Okay, and we're almost done. Medical roots. So again, this is the slide I'm going to have for each and every medical root in this entire session and all the sessions because there are way too many medical roots. But these are the 10 that I thought were important. So we've got kypho, which is humpback, the posterior curvature of the thoracic spine, lamino, it's refers to the lamina, which is the part of the vertebral arch. We have lordo, the curve. It's basically curve or sway back, like lordosis, which is the condition of the anterior curvature in the lumbar spine. We have lumbo, which refers to the lower back, the lumbar region. We have myello, which refers to bone marrow. We have osteo, which refers to bone. Ortho means straight. Scolio means crooked or bent. So we talked about scoliosis, the lateral curvature of the spine. We have spondylo, which refers to the vertebra and referring to the conditions of the structure. And we have vertebra, which also refers to vertebra. And we use it to refer to for describing the structure of the vertebral column. And we're done.